over again? Okay. All right. So thank you so much for joining us today. We have Dr. Christine Salkin Davis. She is a writer, poet, artist, emeritus professor from Concord, North Carolina. She earned an MA in Communication Studies with an emphasis on adult creativity from UNC Greensboro and is a PhD in health communication from the University of South Florida in 2005. She has certifications in neuro-linguistic programming and spiritual direction and is trained as an end-of-life doula. She has written 10 books, including 3 textbooks on end-of-life and death communication. As a prolific communication scholar, she describes her academic work as being at the intersection of contemplative and arts-based methods of understanding and health, specifically in the areas of children's health, end-of-life communication, and family disability. She recently retired from the Communication Studies Department at UNC Charlotte. So, hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us. All right, so let's start with the first question here. Just some background. How did you find yourself in communication studies and specifically the end-of-life and death sphere?
So you're taking me back a long time.
That's right.
And when I was an undergraduate many years ago, trying to find my major, I think I was on my 3rd major and sat in my car crying one day and I don't know what to major in. So I just looked at the whole list of possible majors, and my dad had worked in public relations in the film industry. And so I saw that there was a major for film studies, which was in the communication studies department. And I said, yeah, that sounds like fun. I'll do that. And so I was a film studies major, thought I was going to be the great documentary filmmaker, and of course didn't and wasn't, and graduated. But I had taken some classes in communication studies because I was in that department. And so a lot of years later, when I wanted to go to graduate school to get some credentials to support some corporate consulting work that I was doing, I was in marketing at that time. I decided to get my master's at UNC Greensboro with an emphasis in organizational communication, and then later focused that on creativity, adult creativity. While I was there, I took a class under Buddy Goodall, and I don't know if you remember him or remember his name. He was like the one of the founders of autoethnography and narrative ethnography. And I took an ethnography class from him, and I had been working in marketing research for almost 20 years at that time, and had been a very traditional researcher. I did qualitative and quantitative, but in a very traditional way. And Buddy taught me that I could do something with my writing that was much more interesting, much more creative. And so in his class, I wrote an ethnography about my dad's death. My dad had died about a year before that. And Buddy encouraged me to pursue that direction. So I got some encouragement, actually pursued health communication. By the time I got my PhD and went down to the University of South Florida, my mom had also died. And I had a lot of deaths in my family. My grandmother lived with me when I was growing up, and she died, and my grandparents had all died. So I was pretty familiar with death because I'd had a lot of those experiences. And so when I was at the University of South Florida, I got a fellowship with the hospice in Tampa, Florida, and ended up, actually, that was my first book about end of life. And ended up studying that and wrote about my dad's death and then my mom's death, and just kind of fell into that. Why my interest, obviously, as I said, my personal experience, but also death is the common denominator between all of us. We all experience death. Death is our human experience. And I'd had all these deaths. I had the recent deaths of my parents, and I was relatively young for in my 30s for losing my parents. And I work things out by researching them, by becoming analytical and asking how and why. And so I just fell into that and just started doing more and more research in that. And eventually, I was also looking at some other areas related to health, kind of other liminal conditions. And started doing more and more work exclusively in end of life. Whoops.
Excuse
There you
me.
are.
Kind of piggybacking off of the personal experience and how that played into your career, how does a researcher in this field um, avoid being self-indulgent with maybe their own memories of their own loss and experiences while trying to complete their research? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm an autoethnographer, so I don't think you can be self-indulgent. I think you can be maybe not reflexive enough, maybe insufficiently analytical, perhaps, but
Mm,
autoethnography and specifically scholarship in general doesn't have to be overtly analytical
mhm,
because uh, experience is a valid way of knowing. So I don't think self-indulgence is a criteria. I think you have to be able, however, if you're writing about your own experiences, you have to be able to take the step back so that you can uh, see it from a distance, see it from connect it maybe to a cultural experience, connect it maybe to theories, perhaps. Um, uh, and you have to be able to step into it so you can show your audience, the people you're writing for, what it's like to be within the experience. And I
mm,
can tell you from my research with a lot of physicians at our hospital, just to be able to let them hear the words of the people, their patients, the people they're working with, to hear about the experience from the voice of the people who are experiencing it, just that voice is incredibly valid, whether or not there's a layer of analysis overtly in that. And that's not
mm.
self-indulgent to give voice to people experiencing things.
That's a great perspective. Um, so of your body of research, has any study profoundly impacted you or left you with a lasting impression?
Well, I think all of them have, especially my ethnographies, but I'll mention two of them. Uh, two of my more recent ones. If you'd asked me 20 years ago or 10 years ago, I might have said something different.
Mm,
But I did an ethnography of Levine Children's Hospital's pediatric palliative care team. And I studied that team for, I think it was just under a year, sat in on their weekly rounds, weekly team meetings, shadowed all the team members, the physicians and the social workers and nurses, talked to the patients, interviewed all of the team members, interviewed a lot of patients, did focus groups with the team members, and then wrote a narrative ethnography of that. And in that narrative ethnography, which I co-wrote with Dr. John Crane, we connected it to cultural studies and the larger culture. That had a profound effect on me. When you're studying families with dying babies and dying children, it's incredibly impactful and emotional. But the most interesting thing, the reason that it became incredibly impactful, was that as I was, the summer after I got out of the field and was writing up, listening to the tapes, reading the field notes, starting to write up write up the research. My daughter, who was pregnant with twins, went into an early labor, and one of the twins died and the other was in the NICU for 3 weeks. And so I'm in the middle of
mm.
this research, and suddenly it became very real to me, and I experienced what the people I was studying experienced. And so that was incredibly, obviously left a lasting impression. The
Wow.
research is the research I'm involved with right now. I in fall of 2021, I got a Fulbright Scholar Award to go to Ireland for a semester to study the Magdalene laundries. And I don't know if you're familiar, if you all have heard of that, but just for the audience, the Magdalene laundries are lifelong forced labor camps for, by definition, women who are unmarried. In practice, it was unmarried women, it was women who were promiscuous, but then maybe potentially promiscuous, or orphans, or girls who had been raped or assaulted, incestual rape through their families. And their parents thought that letting the priests and the nuns take care of their daughters was safe. It prevented the family from being shamed to the point where the family couldn't exist. Lest you think that this is ancient history, the last laundry was closed in, I believe it was 96. And there are people alive today who spent their entire lives in the laundries, because once you got in, you couldn't get out. When they had babies, they were, the women in labor were not given any kind of attention or medicine. Many of them died in childbirth. Many of the babies died because they were neglected. Many of the babies were stolen and sold in illegal adoptions in the US. Just this huge scandal that just came out in the past 10, 15 years. And so I'm studying the Magdalene laundries as an example of a concept called necropolitics, which Achilles coined that term. He's talking about political acts to annihilate your nation state enemy, but that term can be used basically for any case where death or the threat of death is used as a tool for coercion and control. So I'm writing a book right now about my experience in Ireland and the laundries.
Wow.
So those two things are profoundly meaningful to me.
So speaking of books, you've written 3 textbooks, of course, about death and dying communication. So what really motivated you to write those?
Well, I've written a lot of textbooks. In addition to my textbooks on death and dying, I've written several. I'm about to do my 4th edition of our research methods textbook. I've written a lot of textbooks. A lot of the classes that I teach, I'm developing them, or have taught. I'm retired now, but I have taught. I'm developing them as either a new class, a new topic, or a new way of thinking about an existing topic. And so it's hard for me when I teach to find textbooks. And usually my students end up reading multiple textbooks, and really I only want a little piece from here and a little piece from here. And so maybe you got a lot of handouts, or maybe you got this, or maybe you got that, but it's never an ideal, the reading is never an ideal situation. And so I just found I just as soon write my own book. I've been, usually after I taught the class a couple times, then I'll draft a textbook related to what I've been teaching, take it from my lectures, and then I can use a book that's absolutely tailored to what I'm teaching and the way I'm teaching it. And then I found that other people appreciate that, and they appreciate the way I've taught it and the way I've laid it out. I enjoy writing, and I've been told that our research methods book students actually enjoy it, which is amazing. So, I enjoy writing, and I enjoy writing in ways that are helpful to students and other faculty too, of course.
Write the book you want to read, huh?
Yes, exactly. Well, right,
Mhm.
because I write about these cheery topics, research methods, and death and dying. So,
Yep. Hey. So, what are some future death and dying, um, I'm sorry, I totally was looking at a different question here. Okay. All right. What should future death and dying scholars attend to in their research? And along those lines, do you have any tips for those scholars?
well, I started my end of life communication scholarship in interpersonal communication. So I was looking at patient-provider communication. I studied hospice, was my first study, actually in graduate school. My first book came out of that. And so I did a lot of micro level communication, micro level investigation. And then there was the point that I said, I want to understand the bigger picture. I want to understand the cultural context to end of life communication. And that's what I think is I'm not saying nobody's doing it, but that's not where everybody's gravitating. And I would like to see more and more scholarship at the cultural level of communication at end of life, because I'm a social constructionist through and through. And how cultures communicate about death and dying constructs the ways we treat the dead, but also constructs the ways we treat the living. And so I'm thinking, for instance, I've done work in cemeteries, and I've looked at like Arlington National Cemetery, but I've looked at some cemeteries where formerly enslaved Africans were buried, and the difference in those cemeteries, and what does the way we treat our dead, what does the way that these graves are revered and these other graves are neglected and forgotten and disappeared. They're invisible. What does that say about the way we think of those people and those people's descendants? And so things like cemetery communication, things like mediated communication, political communication, laws around death and dying. You know, we could talk a lot about what do the laws around assisted suicide, for instance, say about physician-assisted suicide, say about the regard we have for bodily autonomy, for instance. And so, so much of this cultural communication, critical communication, really tells us a lot about how we treat the living. And I would like to see more and more scholarship in that area.
Oh, that's so interesting how it reflects on the living.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Uh-huh. Well, and you're a storyteller, really, from what we've all gathered from your work, especially just ethnography and autoethnography, and those are common methods and a thread in your work. So why have you been drawn to these methods? I mean, you kind of went into it, but I kind of want to go deeper. Why do you think storytelling is such an effective communication method?
Because, said Walter Fisher, humans are storytelling animals, right? I'm sure you've heard that. You know, we live our lives in stories, and the stories we tell ourselves and the stories we tell each other construct our experiences. And honestly, I believe this so strongly. I don't believe we can understand human experiences without delving into our shared storytelling. Because everything is a story. We're born into a story, we live into a story, we die into a story. We live in stories. We can't escape. You know, when you talk to people, you're telling them stories. You're telling yourself stories. There's a branch of therapy called narrative therapy where they help you re-story your story, because the story you tell yourself is the story you're living out. And if you don't like the story you're living out, change what they say, change your story. You know, change the ending. You can't change the beginning, change the ending. And so we experience the world through stories. And so to me, that's the human experience. And again, I'm a communication scholar, so I'm interested in studying how we construct our experiences, and it is through stories. And so why not use stories to reflect that?
Yeah, no, that's so poignant. Well, I know you said you're writing a book, but you're retired.
Yes, yeah.
Congrats from all of us. You mentioned the book, so that's one thing that's next for you. Anything else on the radar?
Yeah, so that book, so I'm writing it as a memoir. It's
Okay.
called Searching Through Time, and I finished the first draft. Yay, it's 100,000 words. So ate it
All
up.
right.
A lot of writing has gone on since I retired, and it's been a year. I'm going to take a year to revise it and edit it and get the second draft done, and then hopefully in about a year I'll start looking for publishers, and I want that to be published as a popular press book. That'll be my first non-academic book. So that's the plan. The book is about my Fulbright in Ireland, interspersed with the stories about the research I was doing about the Magdalen laundries and what it's like to be a woman in Ireland. I connect with my Irish ancestors, and I'm connecting with my mother line. So the mother line is you know, your grandmother to your mother to you to your daughter. So it's the line of the women in your family. There's a concept called motherline stories, the stories that our grandmothers told our mothers and our mothers told us, and we tell our daughters, that explain to us what it's like to be a woman in this family. So I want to look at Ireland's motherline stories, because their motherlines are breached. You know, I just talked about the Magdalen laundries. My motherline is Irish, and so I'm looking at my motherline and Ireland's motherline. And then my sister died a year and a half ago, and so I'm kind of connecting her as part of my mother line. And so it's all woven together. So I've got a developmental editor looking at it right now, and then I'll, as I said, edit it moving forward. I've got a poetry book coming out this year titled Life and Fully in Every Breath. Has a few poems about my experiences with death, and some other important topics. A lot about necropolitics are in there. A lot of about some of our babies in cages, and babies used as weapons of war. Some topics. I'm doing a lot of art. I do clay art. I'm doing watercolor. And related to this topic, I'm doing a series of paintings of cemeteries. So that's interesting. And I'm going to be working on art to illustrate my poetry book. I'm doing some traveling. I'm reading. I'm doing ballet. I'm basically feeding my inner child again. So I'm reading poetry. I'm doing ballet. I'm starting a tap dance class tomorrow for the first time since I was a little kid. I hike a lot, so I'm keeping very, very busy. So I'm very, very happy. I'm enjoying my post-retirement time.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss, first
Thank you.
off. And that's wonderful that you get to envelop her into that study, the mother line. That's so interesting. Have you always used art in the written word as a way to process or heal, or
Yes.
what inspires those?
Well, I've written poetry, for instance, since I was a child. I probably as far back as middle school, and I did art. My aunt was an artist, and so when I was a small child, we would used to get to spend a week with her in the summer, and she would teach us art and different crafts and things. So I have a long history of both of those. Yeah, and art I find is very zen, very meditative. Um,
Mhm.
uh, it's all art. Art is all about the process, and both watercolor and clay are types of art that you can control. In clay about 50%, in watercolor maybe 60%. After that, the medium takes over. And so I love the interaction between me and the clay, or me and the paint, um, and just to kind of see where it goes. It's a good
Well,
philosophy of life, just
yeah,
appreciate the process.
absolutely. I'm excited to read your new book when it comes out. Love to take a look at those poems as well. Is there anything else you'd like to add for the end of life and death scholars at home?
Well, I am just so excited about this group. And when I started studying end of life communication, there were very few of us. I wasn't the only one. Jillian Tullis was right after me in my graduate program. Alyssa Foster was right before me in my graduate program. But we were kind of it, and there weren't a lot of other scholars out there studying this. As I said, I think this is a hugely, hugely, hugely important topic, an area of study, and I'm very, very excited to be part of it. I appreciate your inviting me, and also just excited for what you all are doing. You asked for tips earlier, and I didn't. I don't think I answered that piece. And so I'll leave you with this. That's a good, possibly last thing to say.
Perfect.
Um, when I was doing my hospice research, my first book about hospice, one of the doctors told me that he had to come to terms with his own mortality before he could go to work for hospice. He was an oncologist, and he had been,
Mm,
of the save them at all cost uh, belief system. And when he went to work for hospice, he not only had to come to terms that his patients were going to die, but that made him remember that he was going to die. And so he had to come to terms with that. I think that's a big piece of doing this research. I think it's people need to know it's okay to get emotional. This is an emotional topic. I would hope that we're comfortable with resonating with sadness, and with different fear and all the emotions people have around death and dying. And then I'll end with telling you what I tell all my students when I teach end of life communication: get comfortable with using the real words, right? People are dead. It's death. People are dying. I've learned to be a little more gentle with people, but the euphemisms just drive me crazy. Um, because, he passed away. And I've started saying that because people cringe when you say he died. But, just it is that's what it is, and yeah, just maybe practice getting comfortable with using the real words. So we can all become comfortable with the concept and with the idea.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your wonderful insight and giving us some stories. Thank you for being our first Scholar Spotlight.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if that's it, we'll let you get on with your life, and we'll be in touch when your stuff is being promoted on social media and when we have it up on the website. We'll send you a link.
Perfect. Thank